Today I want to share with you just a few little back bending tips for camel pose specifically, which will help to make this pose a lot more accessible for your students and actually make it a lot safer for them as well. Quite often as a teacher, you've probably seen in camel pose or even experienced in your own body through your practice, there is a great inclination and a tendency to collapse into the lumbar spine, to really drop heavy into that area. Now, partly this is due to the fact that we have maybe been led to believe, and maybe we're teaching this, I taught this at one point in time too, that camel pose is defined by grabbing the heels, and that's kind of where we want to go. And that's the ideal place to create camel pose. Now, while I think that there can be benefits to the shape that we're creating, the opening through the chest, the lift of the chest, in the backward bend, the opening through the tops of the thighs and the hip flexors, what often happens is because there is such a drive to grab the heels, we actually end up collapsing into the back of the body, and it is not worth it because this creates a lot of problems further down the track, and it really heavily concentrates the spinal extension into the lumbar spine instead of distributing it through the mid and the upper spine as well. Furthermore, when we collapse into it, a lot of the muscles, when we grab those feet, a lot of the supporting muscles through the back of the body, they switch off, or they just become a lot more passive than if we were to keep the hands off of the feet. And they become more passive in order to relax the body into being able to grab the heels. It's not very often at all when you see a student who's able to stay engaged and stay supported through both the front of the body and the back of the body as they grab the feet. Anatomy also plays a big role in this. So if you have someone that has really long arms, a really long torso, let's say, in the right proportions, and really short femur, then it might be super easy for them to grab those heels. But if you do not have that, then what the options are is, well, I've just got to kind of collapse to grab onto my heels. And you probably see a lot of your students doing that. Now, if the true intention of you teaching camel to your students is to help them create spaciousness in the front of the body, build the strength, and create that backward bend, well then, I'm going to show you a really great tip that you can use that does not involve grabbing the heels at all, so that your students can begin to develop the understanding of the strength and the structure and the support that is needed in order for them to sustain this type of backward bend. Now, not only will this approach bring a level of accessibility to this pose for your students, it also builds up the longevity of the practice and improves the well-being of your students and their spinal health at the same time. So if you're still with me here, I want you to watch this with an open mind, understanding that, again, what is the intention of camel? The intention is not, I grab my heels. That's not when the benefits happen. The benefits of camel are happening in the body through the actions of gradually coming into spinal extension. Now, whether you're here or whether you're back and grabbing your heels, I can tell you right now that that person who's grabbing the heels is not getting any more benefits, health benefits, well-being benefits than the person who's simply upright like this. So at the end of the day, you as a yoga teacher also have to understand that all of your students have different intentions. But if your intention as a teacher is to help your students build a more sustainable, a more accessible practice, then this is something that you want to bring to their attention. So instead of getting them to just reach back and grab the heels, you're going to get them to bring their arms up and their hands behind their head, but keep a gap between the hands and the head. So you want to get them to start raising the arms up first, and then from here they can either have the palms together or the fingertips together with the palms open. Now they'll know which works best for them when they move into this next step, which is to bend the elbows. So see here, if someone's capacity of shoulder mobility is here, then it's a better idea for them to keep their palms apart. But if they're here, then they might like to test by bringing their palms together. But now this next step will indicate even further which approach is going to be better for them. So as they come into the back bend, you can encourage them to spread the shoulder blades apart. Now, I find that spreading the shoulder blades apart is a lot easier to achieve when the elbows scoop up and forward, yeah? So we're not doing this, okay, where the shoulder blades squeeze together. We're spreading them apart Now for some of your students, they might find keeping the shoulder blades spread apart is doable and maintainable when the elbows are out to the side. And other students might find that it works better when they're pointed more forward. As long as those shoulder blades can stay spread apart here, then that is going to dictate what's happening with the palms and what's happening with the elbows. Then from there, there's a squeeze between the thighs, a kicking down of the tops of the feet, and an intention to keep a gap between the hands and the back of the head. And then you get your students to start to move into a back bend. And now at no point are they resting the head into the hands, because as soon as they do that, they're going to collapse into the lower spine mainly. So the emphasis is keep a gap between the backs of the hands and the head, keep the shoulder blades spread apart, and then move into that spinal extension. Now again, you might see your students doing this kind of thing, okay? So they can keep the elbows wide so long as they can spread the shoulder blades apart. And the shoulder blades spreading apart, it's almost like a little lift out of the lumbar spine, and it helps to redistribute the extension so it's not just in that lower spine, but it moves it to the mid spine and into the upper spine as well. So this is a tool for redistribution of that target area. So as they come back, still squeezing between the thighs, kicking the tops of the feet down, and then you can obviously give any other instructions that you think would be needed here as your students come up and back. Now, the glute activation is really important because that activation reciprocally opens through the front of the hips and the front of the thighs. And that is really what's required in order for the body to move up and back. Now, as soon as the head rests on the hands, there's going to be deactivation of the muscles along the front and the back chain to some degree, because we're kind of resting. So we want to keep that gap between the hands and the head, whether the palms are in prayer or whether they're open, and that's the camel pose. Now from there, if you feel that your students have really developed the understanding and the awareness of staying lifted, then you might get them to release the hands and reach back, potentially feeling how far those feet are. Now, if they need to collapse in order to get to the feet and there's a resting point, then you know they've lost the stability of the spine in order to create the backward bend. We're not forcing the backward bend. We're using the stability and the mobility to naturally create the spinal extension. So perhaps grabbing the feet is not actually going to be possible for a lot of people. Maybe it used to be, but if you teach it this way, all of a sudden, that might not be possible anymore. Now, yes, we're missing out on a little bit of that chest opening. So this is where, again, after you get your students to really understand keeping that gap, squeezing the thighs, kicking down the tops of the feet, and squeezing into the glutes here, then maybe you're also coupling that with a little bit of chest opening here. But you might find that a lot of your students prefer to have the arms up and back in that capacity. So this is a really great tool that you can use for your students to make camel pose more beneficial, more sustainable, and more accessible. This really opens up the mobility side of things and doesn't just look at the spinal extension through forcing flexibility or I've got to grab my heels. If your student can grab their heels while still maintaining the lift of the chest, that's great, that's cool. If not, then you might want to explain and share with them that there is a possibility of them creating a situation where they might not be able to do this pose anymore. They might create an injury because of the amount of force that they're using. So as the spine extends back, obviously there's going to be force. So your students really need to lift up against that, activating through the front body naturally, activating through the back body to reciprocally release the front body and control the descent, not just flop and hang into it. So give this a try in your classes if this is something that really resonates with you. And if you liked this video, please let me know in the comments and subscribe to my channel for more videos just like this.